Have you been diagnosed with depression and struggle with sadness?
Maybe you're scared of being criticized.
Loss of interest, aches and pain.
Always thinking something terrible.
Ask your doctor about Effects or Exile. Ask your doctor about Cymbalta.
Talk to your doctor about Zoloft.
So talk to your healthcare professional.
Get with your doctor today.
Your doctor.
Tell your doctor.
Contact your doctor immediately.
Talk with your doctor.
40年以上前、主要な精神科医たちがプエルトリコで会合を開き、将来の計画を練り上げました。
We see a developing potential for nearly a total control of human emotional status, mental functioning, and will to act.
彼らの計画は2000年までに人間の行動をあらゆる面で管理する一連の精神医薬を作り出すことでした。
I was diagnosed with depression and put on Paxil.
ADD, and I was prescribed Ritalin.
Bipolar disorder, and I take lithium.
Depression, Effects or Lexapro.
PTSD, Zoloft.
I was on Paxil.
When they placed me on Zoloft.
They gave me Adderall.
I was prescribed Siptamil.
Tegretol.
Lexapro.
Risperdal.
Stelazine.
Adderall.
Concerta. Orzine.
Vyvanse.
Lorazepam.
Effexor.
Clonazepam.
Ritalin.
Dexamphetamine.
Paxil. Cylert.
Prozac.
Adderall.
Elavil.
Depakote, Wellbutrin, Seroquel, etc., etc.
世界中で1億人もの人々が精神医薬を取っています。一体どうして精神科医たちが彼らに自分は病気だと信じ込ませたのです。
They want you to think you're diseased from birth, and that all those experiences of life, childhood and adolescence and teenage years and adulthood and being a senior citizen, that these are all various stages of disease.
Because let's face it, we've all been depressed at one time. We've all been anxious at one time. These are normal emotions that we feel.
Every emotional and spiritual problem is reduced to a label.
And of course, all of those diseases require pharmaceutical treatments. This is big, big business.
医療従事者として多額の収入を得ていながら、精神科医たちは自分の職業に科学的根拠が欠けていることを悪びれることなく告白するかもしれません。
You don't really have any specific blood tests or other tests that are definitive for any mental illness whatsoever.
It would be neat if it would become much more scientific.
Well, if you go to my office and you tell me that you're depressed, there's nothing, no blood sample, whatever, no tests.
There are not current available tests to verify your diagnosis.
I don't use any tests.
You do not have a test to say, well, this is this disorder and this is the best medication for this disorder.
For many years we thought we had the tests nailed down, but it turned out that they weren't of any value.
If you don't know what's causing the symptoms, then to give somebody something to alleviate the symptoms is close to impossible.
By the time a drug's approved and it hits the general population, we don't know even 50% of the side effects that are involved with that drug.
And these pills cause heart attacks and liver problems and immune system problems and lots of other medical problems. So you're playing with fire.
抗精神薬は毎日のように深刻な副作用を引き起こしています。精神科医や製薬会社は自分が販売する薬品の危険性を十分に理解していますが、何も知らない消費者はその影響に苛まれるがままになっています。
Everything became worse. Each mood swing was worse.
He would have chronic headaches, chronic, nausea, not feeling good.
She was very agitated, very, very jumpy.
She was having horrible hallucinations.
Her personality was disintegrating.
Once he started on that drug, the cloud just stayed over him and stayed over him and stayed over him. It got darker and darker.
He thought there wasn't anything worth living to kill himself. That was not Matthew. That was the drugs.
At least I would like to have said, I love you. I didn't get a chance to do that.
精神医薬によって大勢の人々が毎日のように何らかの害を被っているだけでなく、毎月およそ3000人が死亡しています。しかしこれほど悲惨な状況に陥ったのは精神科医と製薬会社が手を結び、こうした薬品を世界中の医師たちに売り込んだからです。今日精神医薬の7割が一般の医師によって処方されています。これはどのようにして起こったのでしょう。販売戦略です。
It's about creating a good story that uses science that convinces a physician to think about writing a prescription.
This is not science. This is incredibly effective marketing. It has nothing to do with science.
They use what I call statistical contortionism. Basically just skew the numbers, make everything look fantastic, you hide the bad numbers.
They're learning every trick in the book. They're evolving into efficient marketing machines, and it's working.
There's definitely an unholy alliance between psychiatry and pharmaceutical sales. That's a marriage made in heaven.
They're like conjoined twins. They're joined at the wallet.
精神医学の診断マニュアルには374もの精神障害が含まれ、今後も増える見込みでこのビジネスは急成長しています。製薬会社が取り揃えている抗精神薬は1966年の44品目から現在では174品目まで増えています。抗精神薬の売上上位5品目の販売総額は世界の半数以上の国の国民総生産を上回っています。つまり精神医薬産業は年間3000億ドル以上をかき集めているのです。どうしてこんなことが？それは信じがたいほどの、しかし無視すれば命に関わる不正なのです。
We took him to a psychiatrist, and within a matter of minutes, yeah, she's ADHD, and here's your drug.
Went on to Medicaid, and 5 minutes later, he was on Zyprexa.
He saw the psychiatrist and prescribed the medicine for 20 minutes.
The guy didn't even look at her. He talked to her a little bit. Now, how can you tell if somebody's ADHD or not ADHD from just a few minutes talking to her?
Next thing I know, I'm getting handed a handful of Xanax. That's how easy it is to get these drugs. Just so easy. It was just passed to me like candy. That's simple.
If a person were to walk in off the street, sit down with a psychiatrist, the chances of him being prescribed a drug before he were to leave the office, I would have to put it at 100%.
Psychiatrists prescribe drugs. They might have different ways of diagnosing, they might have different ways of interacting with a patient, but it's rare to find a psychiatrist that uses no drugs.
The psychiatrists today are, in quotes, admitting they can't cure these mental illnesses, and they're therefore going to manage your illness by using a drug.
50 years ago, a person who was going through a divorce would have relied on family, friends, clergy, and even the family doctor to a certain extent for conversation to work through the issue. They certainly wouldn't have been medicated.
抗精神薬の時代が来る前の精神科医たちは医療従事者の中でも重要視されることがなく、その仕事もほぼ精神医療施設内に限定されていました。治療法を持たない彼らは一般市民や同業者から普通の医師とみなされることもほとんどありませんでした。
Psychiatrists had for years been on the fringe of medicine. Typically, the standard doctor internist would have very low regard for psychiatrists because it was understood not to be a very clear science or art.
Psychiatrists wanted to be viewed as physicians, as doctors, and in order to be viewed as physicians and doctors, the people they dealt with had to be viewed as patients. And if doctors dealt with diseases, then their patients had to be diseased.
Psychiatrists had a wonderful opportunity, they felt, to become respected in the eyes of their peers. They raced to create a whole diagnostic book called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which was created by consensus.
A group of psychologists and psychiatrists get together, and if they made common observations, they have a vote and they now classify a new disease. And they give it a number and it graduates into the DSM classification.
And it's a dangerous book. It's a book that has many disorders that could apply to any one of us because the disorders are not real medical diseases. And it's things that apply to nearly all of us at times. Are you afraid of meeting new people? Are you afraid to speak in front of a large crowd of people? Does it make you nervous to go and to talk to your boss about a complaint?
You can invent a mental disorder based on a checklist of symptoms, and that is exactly how the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the billing Bible for psychiatry, works.
1952年に DSM の初版が出て以来、病名の数は着実に増えていきました。 DSM は106のいわゆる精神障害を列記した130ページの薄い小冊子から886ページにまで膨れ上がりました。精神科医たちが診断、投薬し、治療費を請求するためにはこの本を使わなければならないのです。事実、精神医療産業は現在 DSM を使って民間や政府の保険金から720億ドル以上を集めています。
The DSM is used to diagnose and then give a label, and the label is used for billing purposes. That's how they get paid.
You have to have a term in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual in order to then call it a disease and treat it as a disease and write a prescription for it.
And so because they can vote it in, they can create, and then the drug industry can just take over and market their drugs for those new disorders.
And those drugs were welcomed by psychiatry leaders because it made us real doctors.
Of course, first the public had to believe that there was something wrong with them, and that thing wrong was biochemical, and that could then be treated by a drug which was supposed to cure all.
And so it was relatively easy, I think, to say, well, look, let's start looking at mental illness as fundamentally a matter of chemical imbalance in the brain.
Chemical imbalance is a term that's used as a marketing ploy, as opposed to anything that there's scientific evidence to support.
Nobody has yet measured, demonstrated, or created a test to show that somebody has a chemical imbalance in their brain. Period.
How do you market a drug that restores the chemical balance or corrects a chemical imbalance? How can you do that in good conscience if you don't even know what one is?
The whole myth of the chemical imbalance was created to sell drugs.
精神科医と製薬会社はこの神話を使って何も知らない消費者に大量の向精神薬を摂取させ巨額の利益を得てきましたが、一般市民は取り返しのつかないほどの代償を払うことになりました。自殺したアメリカ人のほぼ半数が向精神薬を取っていました。推計によると向精神薬による年間の死亡者は殺人による死亡者の 2.5 倍以上です。ではこうした危険な向精神薬から一般市民を守る役割を委ねられているのは誰でしょう。アメリカ合衆国では食品医薬品局 FDA です。しかしその精神薬諮問委員会は製薬業者、学術団体、開業医、政府機関の間を行き来する精神科医たちに牛耳られ、いわゆる回転ドア状態です。
The revolving door at FDA is one of the primary reasons why the system that we have works so poorly. That revolving door is a direct result of the fact that a group of people with the same mindset are put into positions of being regulators and in the position of being formulators and sellers and marketers.
The panels that are formed by the FDA to evaluate these drugs, the psychiatrists who are on those panels, almost all of them have conflicts of interest where they have directly or indirectly received funding from the very industry and the very parties within the industry whose drugs they are evaluating.
So there's this tight little relationship between psychiatry, pharmaceutical industry, and FDA where they each mutually support each other, and yet the mental health of the population does not improve.
典型的な例は抗うつ剤パキシルを承認した FDA の薬物評価委員会です。この委員会の精神科医たちは全員が製薬業界と金銭的なつながりを持っていました。このような公共の利益の侵害は議会による調査を促すほど横行しています。
When I check these advisory committees who make recommendations to the FDA, and they're always approved after the advisory committee, I found that there were conflicts of interest. I found that many of the people on the advisory committees had never filed a proper report on stocks and bonds that they owned that might be viewed as a conflict of interest, and they're by law supposed to do that.
公共の利益に反するこうした精神医療界、製薬業界、FDA の結びつきは1992年にプドゥーファとして知られる処方薬申請者負担金法が成立した後、さらに強固なものになりました。この法律により FDA には1つの薬品ごとに10万ドルの審査費用が支払われ、抗精神薬が直ちに認可の手続きを終え、かつてない速さで処方者の手に渡るようになるのです。
Congress told the FDA, your job is no longer to make sure drugs are squeaky clean safe before they get out on the market. Your job now is to hurry up and get new drugs on the market faster.
It acted to set the priorities of the FDA so that if there was a fee paid for a particular drug approval, it could be put on the fast track and rushed to market with less than the usual scrutiny that the FDA would give it.
このようなスピード認可は安全性の代わりに販売を優先するものでした。この法案の通過以来、医薬品の審査に費やされる時間は1992年にはほぼ2年だったものが4年後にはたった6ヶ月にまで短縮されました。その間、一般に売り出された新薬の数は倍増しました。スピード認可は市民の安全にとって破滅的なものですが、精神医療界と製薬業界には莫大な利益をもたらします。薬品の認可が早ければそれだけ早く金儲けができるからです。その金額は莫大です。各抗精神薬の売り上げは1日平均770万ドル以上にも上るのです。ジプレキサという薬品の売り上げは1日でほぼ1200万ドルになります。現在 FDA は一つの新薬の申請に100万ドル以上の審査費用を課していますが、医薬品のスピード認可に歯止めがかかる兆しはありません。
If you look at the relationship between the FDA, the pharmaceutical industry, and the psychiatrists, there's some kind of game that they're playing there. And what is the game? Well, you could say it's money, definitely money.
And when you follow the money, you realize that there is no money in health. There's big money in disease.
That's why all you hear about is managing disease or treating disease. You don't really talk about curing disease.
And so psychiatrists have become mainstream doctors in America. And that is because of the pharmaceutical industry. They can thank the pharmaceutical industry because they become mainstream and because they have a lot more money than they used to. And the drug industry can thank them because now they have thousands of soldiers in their army distributing these drugs to everybody.
乳幼児から高齢者まで精神科医たちが作り出した数多くの架空の精神障害の影響と無縁でいられる人はいません。これらは抗精神薬業界に巨万の富をもたらしています。そして精神科医たちは毎日のように彼らの網を広げ続けています。そのための手段は精神医学による新たなレッテルです。
How many people do you know who have been diagnosed with a mental disorder?
One. With a mental disorder? 2.
I'm sure a couple.
I know a few.
About 3 or 4 personally.
Probably 4.
Half a dozen?
I'll say about 9.
At least a dozen.
I'll bet I could count 15.
20 that I personally know.
My oldest son is diagnosed.
My mother was diagnosed.
Kid from my childhood.
My friend and ex-boyfriend.
Just my grandfather and cousins. A friend of mine, friends.
A sister, my neighbors.
2 friends. A girlfriend. A niece. 1 friend.
My mother.
All my friends, everybody I know.
私たちの周りは精神疾患であふれているように見えます。これは何が原因なのでしょう。精神科医です。彼らの診断統計マニュアルによって地球上にいる誰にでも精神疾患のレッテルを貼ることが可能なのです。
Psychiatrists, I believe, they look at every human being and they divide humans into 2 classes: clients and potential clients.
We see this no more prevalent in any field than in the field of the mental disorders, where one disease after another is invented and then popularized and the public is made to worry about it.
It's disease mongering. It's the selling of sickness. You know, sometimes it's a drug in search of a market, and it's giving public awareness to minor conditions with the ultimate goal to sell more medications. It's not caring for people.
When you run out of symptoms, you don't have any more clientele to market to. So you have to invent disease. And with psychiatric medications, you can invent diseases all day long. Look at human variation.
Everyday things like shyness, sadness, or even situational depressions like grieving, postpartum depression, they all become studied, and prescriptions start to get written for these drugs.
Before these drugs were introduced in the market, people who had these conditions would not have been given any drug at all. And so it is the branding of a disease, and it is the branding of a drug for the treatment of a disease that did not exist before the industry made the disease.
例えば、人見知りは日常生活ではよくあることですが、精神科医らの投票により社交不安障害という名称で彼らの診断統計マニュアルに加えられました。
You know, people are nervous. Well, they come up with, say, social anxiety disorder. SAD, they'll call it SAD.
And the connotation is that everybody ought to be happy and that here's a drug that can make you happy. So that a common occurrence, which is every now and again everybody's sad, we ought to be treating with a drug.
Well, then they'll get this PR firm to drum up business for this. They'll put out all these studies that find, you know, there's so many people afflicted with this SAD, you know, and they'll start putting it in magazines, they'll start putting it on TV, they'll start a patient advocacy group that say, you know, that we're all affected by this, and then they'll come out with Paxil works for this. So they go to the FDA and they said, well, we ran this study and this works for this new invented disorder, and that is SAD, social anxiety disorder. And millions of people suffer from it. And it's purely fictional. It's a normal human emotion that everybody experiences at certain times or another, but they make it into a disease.
Paxil, once it got approved by the FDA as the first antidepressant to be used for social anxiety, it took off huge. And it just moved from number 3 in the market amongst its peer drugs to number 1 in the market.
社交不安障害は抗精神薬の処方ブームを煽る多くの架空の精神障害の一つに過ぎません。
Psychiatrists work to promote what the latest disease is going to be. These days, bipolar is getting that same type of promotion.
Everybody's being educated about their bipolar illness, when in fact, we know having emotional ups and downs is distinctly human.
Now bipolar is thrown around like water. You've got bipolar, I have bipolar. If I'm up today, I'm manic. If I go home tonight and I'm depressed because I'm tired, that shows I have bipolar disease. It's a lot of hokum.
Yeah, I see a lot of things on television about bipolar.
Bipolar? You know, they talk about bipolar a lot.
My oldest son was diagnosed with bipolar.
Bipolar, I've known a lot of bipolar.
2 friends from both of them were like diagnosed with bipolar.
Some people I know that are bipolar.
My neighbor, she was bipolar. I was diagnosed with bipolar.
My mother had bipolar.
He was actually bipolar. Schizophrenic bipolar. Bipolar and obsessive compulsive. Bipolar and ADHD. Bipolar disorder. Bipolar, yeah.
Bipolar situation. Bipolar.
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 There are 3 personality disorders, and then the most recent is bipolar. And that's just been in the past year.
特に子供における双極性障害という病名を先頭に立って普及したのは精神科医ジョセフ・ビーダーマン博士でした。25もの製薬会社の代弁者、相談役、研究員として金を受け取っていた人物です。
In 1996, the drug companies funneled all this money to this Dr. Biederman. He's well known. He's the one that came up and said that there's bipolar disorder in little kids. This was unheard of. There was no bipolar disorder in any kids. He came up with the study and published the articles out all over the world, and other doctors followed his lead that bipolar is in little kids.
ビーダーマン博士とその一味による絶え間ない宣伝により1994年以降子どもの双極性障害は40倍に増加しました。一方で抗精神病薬の処方件数は5倍に急増しおよそ250万件に上ります。2008年ビーダーマン博士は上院の調査により複数の製薬会社から得た160万ドルもの個人所得を申告しなかったことを暴露されました。しかしその被害は取り返しがつきません。ビーダーマン博士が作り出した双極性障害の流行により処方されている中で最も強力な抗精神薬である抗精神病薬が精神医療の主流になっています。抗精神病薬の売上トップ3を合計すると 毎分2万5000ドルに上ります。当精神薬業界がどれほど巨大化しても、精神科医たちはそれをさらに大きくするためにせっせと診断に取り組んでいます。
Let's say this is the pie right here of a certain class of medications, and this is a pretty profitable pie, and everybody wants a piece of that pie. But what would happen if we made that pie even bigger? And how you make the pie even bigger is by expanding the uses for those drugs.
They've already got a drug that's approved on the shelf. They can just pull it off the shelf, rename it, repackage it, and say, look, we've got a new drug for a new illness.
When Prozac's patent ran out, that Eli Lilly had to look for a new source of profits. So all they did was change the name of the drug from Prozac to Serafem, change the color of the pill from green to pink, and marketed it for PMDD, which was newly introduced into this book.
What it tells us is that if you can come up with a label, a diagnostic label for a drug, then you can sell it like hotcakes.
It's a business model, and it's $1 billion business model, and it works, and it's going to keep continuing.
今日では誰もが知らないうちに精神医薬を取っている場合があります。名前やパッケージを変え、精神医療以外の目的で処方されるのです。禁煙のための薬として処方される財盤は、実はウェルブトリンという抗うつ剤です。うつや不安のための精神医薬シンバルタは現在尿失禁のための薬エントリーブとして売り出されています。精神医療の研究者たちは抗精神薬を実にさまざまな症状に関して実験しています。肥満、アルコール依存症、ギャンブル好き、のぼせ、ヘルペス、吐き気、かゆみ、震え、髪をかきむしることなどです。それはあらゆる病気に使われる薬です。そして精神薬の危険性を知らされている人はほとんどいません。
As a chemist, I'm making these drugs. They're proving deadly in our labs, and they're proving deadly in other labs. Dangerous, ineffective, causing the exact same thing they're supposed to treat. How are they selling them?
For anyone who's given a label of a psychotic illness, drugs seem to be the automatic choice of treatment as night follows day.
That's all psychiatry does. It's dominated by psychopharmacologists who do nothing but manage symptoms by dispensing pills. That's it. And they don't work. But the fact that they don't work works to the advantage of the drug companies and the psychiatrists, which means that you're not cured, which means that you're a patient for life, you're a customer, you're a client for life. And the worse your health gets, the more drugs you need. It's a great deal for them.
We should all be up in arms about the way we're being treated by psychiatry today. This is a very dangerous industry that has gone so far overboard in inventing fictitious diseases and drugging our children and our population that I consider it to be engaged in crimes against humanity.
年間800億ドル以上が精神薬に投じられている今日の社会で、精神疾患ビジネスによる集中攻撃から逃れることは不可能です。しかし販売戦略の背後には、精神医療の顧客が知ればショックを受けるような秘密が隠されています。どのようにこれらの薬品は試験されているのでしょう。それらは安全なのでしょうか。
No one knows precisely how these psychiatric medications act.
We don't know if I give you a medication if it is going to work or not.
There's not a great deal of scientific support for using them.
I myself, I try to pick a drug whose side effects might be useful.
You have to choose what is the best option.
We don't have sure methods.
There are no rules. Everything it's an art, really. I would say it's a trial and error.
Often it's trial and error.
It's kind of a trial and error.
It's trial and error.
Some degree of trial and error, I guess.
You never know if it's the right drug.
It's a much more complex subject.
There's always going to be huge surprises, and that's what makes it so difficult. The best psychiatrists in the world will mess up all the time.
The American public is being treated as a mass medical experiment. We are all being treated like guinea pigs by the pharmaceutical companies, the psychiatric industry, and the FDA.
They are basically testing drugs on large parts of the population
without really knowing what the results are going to be.
It's a very dire situation that we're facing. We're talking about people's health and in many situations people's lives. These are very serious issues.
抗精神薬は危険な化合物として世界中の政府機関によって厳しく規制されています。新しい抗精神薬が使用を認可されるには市民を保護する目的による薬物試験を経なければなりません。
When a pharmaceutical company develops a new drug that they want to send to the market, what they do is they have to run it through clinical trials. They have to be able to provide to the FDA safety data to say this is a safe and effective drug.
In clinical trials, psychiatrists are engaged to do the research. And we could bank on the fact that these psychiatrists are tied to the pharmaceutical companies.
And a psychiatrist puts their name on there, they're seen as an expert. Talking mental drugs, who writes them? It's psychiatrists. So that's how it works. It's a terrible system.
The desperate thing about it is that it's all dressed up in the name of science. It's not science at all, it's pure marketing. But they get away with it because it's called science.
There's really no test, no x-ray, there's no chemistry that shows you have this condition. It's really just the opinion of someone who is probably taking money from pharmaceutical companies to prescribe drugs to people.
Where's the biochemistry? Where's the research? Where's the substantiation? And the answer is it vaporizes like mist in the morning. It's not there.
しかし、科学的な試験手段が欠けているにもかかわらず、精神科医は危険な薬物の臨床試験をやめようとはしません。臨床試験には4段階の厳密な科学的薬品試験が含まれることになっています。はじめの3つは規制当局の認可を得るために政府に提出されなければなりません。第1段階では薬品の毒性をチェックし、第2段階では薬品が人体の中でどう反応するかを見る試験が実施され、このハードルを超えたら第3段階の試験が行われます。しかし実験室での試験では精神障害を確認も測定もできず、巨額の金がかかっているため精神薬の調査は極めて主観的であり、不正な操作がはびこっています。
There are many places where you can tweak the study just a little bit with the study design or with the way you gather the data or the way the data are reported, and there's so many different ways you could bias a study.
I've seen what they did to the data in these trials. There's no question that they manipulated the data.
For example, let's say they had 100 people to start with. 40% drop out. 30% have a positive response. 30% have no response. They then say that they have a 50% response rate, when in fact, most of us would say it's a 30% response rate because only 30 out of the original 100 really responded. And so you can see that that's a little bit of a manipulation of the research data.
When they design drug studies, they're only looking at the one thing they want to see. And they don't report all the other things that are happening.
典型的な例は抗うつ剤のシンバルタです。
Lilly, I believe, in February of 2004, did a clinical trial study. The people in this clinical trial did not have symptoms of depression. And in that clinical trial, there were 11 attempted suicides and 4 suicides completed. One of which was Tracy Johnson, 19-year-old college girl. She did not have any symptoms of depression, and yet this drug pushed her to commit suicide by hanging herself. That shoots the theory down that they say that, people get suicidal because of the, underlying illness that people kill themselves, that these weren't suicidal people to begin with. These weren't depressed at all. These were healthy people.
それに続いてマスコミが大々的に報じましたが、 FDA 薬品評価委員会の精神科医たちはこの死亡例を無視することに決め、続く8月にはシンバルタの認可へと進みました。
One of the reasons why we have underestimated the potential of some psychiatric antidepressant drugs to actually trigger a suicidal kind of behavior in people is because the people who designed the research study didn't include in the research questionnaire this suicidal behavior. And then you can report that we had 0 incidents of this type of behavior among our subjects.
And then the response is trumpeted as if there's something magical about it, when in fact what's happened is a whole statistical tap dance routine that violates good science. However, on the basis of that kind of phony trial, the drug can be marketed.
Keep in mind that when a drug is tested in the clinical trials, it's only a very short period of time. The final phase of testing can be anywhere from 5 to 6 weeks.
The longest of those studies was 8 weeks. The shortest was 4 weeks. So these are not long-term studies. I think most physicians and most people taking the drugs assume they're long-term, 1 year, 2 years, 3 year studies. They're not. They're very, very short studies.
I find it pretty outrageous that we can base a multi-billion-dollar industry on a few 6 or 8 week clinical trials where antidepressant medications beat a sugar pill by a few percentage points.
このような偏った調査に基づき、致命的な副作用の可能性がある向精神薬が FDA の委員たちによって日常的に認可され、生涯にわたって使用できるようになっています。どうしてこんなことが？医薬品が巨額の利益を生むからです。そして FDA の委員はそれらを認可することで利益を得る人によって占められています。
The FDA panels that evaluate these drugs are largely psychiatrists. All of a sudden you discover there are 20 different pharmaceutical companies paying them, either grants or honorary or some other way. They're getting paid by the pharmaceutical industry.
If you have a psychiatrist who works at the FDA, he could also be being paid by industry. He might sit on industry panels or discussions or get paid to be a speaker. What I found in working with physicians at the FDA was that they could have dual positions. They could sit on an industry board. They could be influenced by industry.
Many of them, the drug manufacturer actually proposes to the FDA, we would like this and this and this person to be on the committee. After all, they're the renowned expert. Well, of course, they're the, quote, expert in a particular drug because they're the one who the drug manufacturer paid to do the very drug study.
Have you been diagnosed with depression and struggle with sadness, trouble sleeping, anxiety, or low energy? Ask your doctor about Effexor XR.
第3段階の認可により、当然ながら猛烈な販売戦略が開始されます。しかし、精神科医たちはすでにこれらの薬品を世界中で宣伝し処方し始めていますが、まだ行われていない段階がもう一つあるのです。第4段階です。
What phase 4 clinical trials are is when they've actually gotten the drug approved and then they get it into the general population so that we finally find out what it does when it hits ethnic populations, women, children.
Then we see who dies, who has seizures, who has deformed children, who has epilepsy, who has diseases downstream, whose heart stops.
The public is the clinical trial. That's where we find out the problems with these drugs.
This is an experimental stage, and it's so much so that one consumer protection group has advised patients that they refuse a prescription for any drug that hasn't already been on the market for 7 years.
So if you're taking a drug that's only been out for a year or 2 or 3, you are a guinea pig.
実験はこれで終わりではありません。精神薬の追加の試験は精神医療の診断統計マニュアルにある作り出された障害を利用して最も弱い立場にいる者に標的を定めることでさらに多くの利益をかき集めるためなのです。
If they test their drugs on children, then they get a 6-month extension on their exclusivity period or patent period.
テキサス州にあるこの精神医薬調査センターは広告を使って子どものボランティアを誘い込んでいます。中に入ると極めて単純な仕掛けでさらに誘惑されます。
This is where they're going to be playing. We have Game Boys, we have Xbox, we have 5 TVs.
They come in here and they help themselves to crackers, cookies, free candy, free crackers.
Everything is paid for. You don't pay for anything.
しかしこうした特典は同年代の子どもたちに自殺や暴力を引き起こすことが知られている強力な精神医薬を彼らに摂取させるためのおとりに過ぎません。
These are drugs that would cost maybe several $100s a month in a pharmacy. They actually are getting them free in research.
We love children, and we just love children because they're our future.
By conducting those tests on children, they get a financial incentive that's worth over $1 billion. Those are the facts. You make of them what you will.
これほどの利益がかかっているので 子どもたちに対する精神医薬の実験がはびこっています。調査済みか調査中の研究が323件あり、中には月経前不機嫌性障害を治療する抗うつ剤に関して子どもたちをテストした2003年の実験もあります。
Those drugs which are barely more effective than placebos often have huge side effects which are dangerous and even deadly to people.
Families don't know the risk. If they actually were aware of the risk and believed it, no one would take that risk.
The psychiatrist would never, she didn't say one word to me about what was going to be the effects of the drugs.
No side effects listed, no, well, let's sit down, we have to talk about this. At that point in time, he said, well, this doesn't have that type of reaction on any children, you know, that it's very safe.
If he had told me then what I know now about it, I never would have taken it.
She said, oh, Beth must have been on Paxil. That's the only way she would kill herself. And I said, well, what is this? How do people know this? I didn't know anybody would know something like that. And we went on the internet, and all of a sudden you find out it's not uncommon. But it's not uncommon for people to become psychotic on these drugs.
We're entitled to know the truth before we give a mind-altering drug to our children, our wife, our mother, our father, ourselves.
We don't really know what they're doing. That's what scares me. It's all made up theory. There are no facts about what these drugs really do. And if someone said, well, we don't know what this is going to do to you, good or bad, would you take that medication?
Now that is not the practice of medicine. That's the practice of marketing. And this practice of marketing is taking lives. And the poor patient doesn't even know it.
しかし向精神薬のテストと販売戦略においては金のために安全性が踏み付けにされています。最も処方されている精神医薬トップ10の売上合計は年間265億ドルを超え、合衆国造幣局から毎年発行される新しい貨幣総額の2倍以上です。しかしこれだけの金を作るためには精神科医たちはまず市場における最も重要な部分を納得させなければなりません。つまり処方する権限を持つ人々です。
The psychiatrists specifically, they're just kind of working as sales agents for the pharmaceutical companies.
There's nothing like another doctor touting the benefits of your drug to drive market share.
They're an extended part of the marketing arm of these companies.
Medications play a primary role.
We give drugs.
Medication is a must.
There's a lot of new medications.
There are medications available for treating GAD.
Medications to use for PTSD.
Antipsychotic medications.
Atypical antipsychotics.
Benzodiazepines.
Stimulants. Antidepressant medications. MAOIs.
Amphetamines.
Anticonvulsant medications.
Once the medications have been balanced out,
then we move on to a combination of 3 medicines.
There's no absolute limit that is set for the number of medications.
There are so many choices.
Apparently we're willing to try almost anything.
精神医薬は処方箋がなければ販売できません。そこで製薬会社は精神科医たちを雇い、精神医薬を仲間の処方者たちに宣伝しています。金の流れは世界有数の名門医学校、影響力の大きな大学に拠点を置く大学系の精神科医のオフィスから始まります。彼らのお墨付きを得て、製薬会社は精神医薬で巨額の売り上げを得ます。
There are a lot of academic psychiatrists especially who have ties to 10 or 15 or 20 different pharmaceutical companies, and so they're making a very large amount of money.
Whether they're professors or whether they work at big, medical institutions, those drug companies will make sure that they've got them on the payroll somehow.
They'll have this person feed this information to their other peers, but it's all being motivated through monies being funded by pharmaceutical companies.
About 40% of the early stage marketing dollars for pharmaceutical companies go straight to these thought leaders, psychiatrists.
いわゆる主要なオピニオンリーダーとのこうした支払い協定には莫大な金が使われています。巧妙な大学系の精神科医であれば複数の製薬会社から個人的に年間50万ドルを受け取ることができるのです。
These people are still considered the stars of their medical centers because they bring in all this great money from the pharmaceutical companies, and that helps keep the coffers of the medical center full.
Universities receive a lot of money from the pharmaceutical industry. Drug companies are building buildings right next to the medical school. They're funding research right and left.
The University of Michigan Depression Center received, I think it was $750,000 from Eli Lilly, and all they do down there is crank out this biological view of psychiatry and mental illness and depression.
大学系の精神科医が自分の大学のために巨額の医薬品マネーを集めているのですから、学校のカリキュラムで抗精神薬に重点が置かれるのも不思議ではありません。
Training programs in psychiatry, the majority of them now are drugs first. You're really a psychopharmacologist in a way when you come out of a psych residency training program.
Even when I went to medical school, psychiatrists did talk to patients. Now all they do is write a prescription and send them away.
A psychiatrist is trained for one purpose, to administer psychiatric drugs.
大学系の精神科医には将来の処方者を徹底的に仕込むだけではなく、自分の同業者にもこうした薬品を強力に宣伝する者もいます。まず彼らは公平な調査として通っている臨床試験研究を作り上げ、でっち上げの精神障害とそれを管理するという薬品の両方を推します。こうした研究は専門誌に掲載され、同業者たちに読まれ、メディアで取り上げられます。しかし読者は知りませんが、こうした研究の約半数においてこれらの精神科医たちは研究に参加していなかったのです。
One of the most unethical practices we're aware of is ghostwriting of journal articles, where somebody at the pharmaceutical company will write the paper and the academic physician will put his name on it and get it published in a major journal when he maybe changed 3 or 4 words in the whole article, and the article was basically written as a marketing tool by the drug company, and yet this academic puts his name on it as if he's the author.
He has had no part in the study, and also he probably hasn't even read the study results, but he is prepared to receive $10,000, $20,000 to put his name at the front of the research, which gives it added authority.
ゴーストライターは日常茶飯事です。 FDA で精神薬の安全性を評価する部門を受け持っている精神科医でさえ、ゴーストライターによる論文に自分の名前を付けていました。
The average physician picks that up and reads it. He believes it. And it's not a mystery that he would believe it. It seems reasonable that it's in black and white, it's in a good journal, it's in the New England Journal of Medicine, it must be true.
多くの場合、これらの専門誌は正当な医学研究という見せかけのもとに精神科医や医師に無料で送られます。なぜ無料なのでしょう。医薬品の広告が出版元に巨額の収入をもたらすからです。
So if you go through a medical journal, you'll see page after page of advertising for bipolar disorder and treatment of using medications, or advertising for depression and treatment of using medications, schizophrenia. So it's really everywhere.
I remember just a couple of years ago, the first time I opened the journal from the American Psychological Association called the APA Monitor, and there was a multi-page ad, high gloss, very expensive, for Concerta, which is time-release Ritalin. I resigned from the American Psychological Association. I wasn't going to be part of this whatsoever.
It's very hard when your major source of income is advertising and advertising placement to write an article that's negative about a particular drug and expect that company to continue to buy ads in your medical journal. So that's a major issue.
しかし、精神医学界の主要なオピニオンリーダーたちは、医学雑誌をゴーストライターの論文で埋めるだけでは満足しません。彼らは医学障害教育の会合においても、抗精神薬の福音を広めています。
Physicians and nurse practitioners and physicians assistants are mandated to take a certain amount of continuing education credits every year. Well, 70% of all continuing medical education is now funded by the pharmaceutical industry.
That seminar is going to be taught by a professional who is employed by the pharmaceutical company. The very nature of where someone is giving you your support means you are biased to that person's side.
Many physicians and many psychiatrists who attend medical conferences don't know that when they go to that conference meeting that's about antidepressants, antipsychotics, and it's generally an academic psychiatrist who's speaking, they don't realize that person's probably making about $10,000 for that 1-hour speech.
しかしパイの分け前を得るために大学系の精神科医になる必要はありません。抗精神薬を大量に処方する精神科医たちは地域での事業拡大を目論む製薬会社のセールスマンからたっぷりと報酬を得ています。
Psychiatrists, especially high prescribers, are targeted and gifted extensively by the industry. Now that gifting is where you need to get specific.
That was not unusual during our marketing conversations to say, well, what's our top drug writer? You know, who's the doctor that's prescribing the most of this drug? Well, you know, let's send them to the Kentucky Derby.
We offered trips on some occasions to come out and hear a 2-hour talk, but it happened to be on a nice island in Hawaii.
There were a lot of things that we did day in and day out to try to get the doctors to write our drugs, or in my case, to write for the psychiatric drugs. We did a lot of lunches and dinners, and we brought in speakers, and those speakers were obviously paid by us, and we would wave, you know, renowned studies at them from renowned journals. But of course, we would never say that these studies were paid for by our company, and that it was written by a ghostwriter who was paid by our company, or that our company tends to do a ton of advertising within that particular medical journal. We would never say that.
毎年3億件以上の精神医薬の処方箋が書かれており、大量処方する精神科医たちは新たな市場を開拓した報酬を豊富に得ています。彼らは他の医療専門家よりも最大 25% も多く医薬品マネーを受け取っています。ある州ではトップの精神科医1人につき平均で年間$45,000を超えています。
Psychiatrists get more kickback from the pharmaceutical companies than any other branch of medicine.
The profession of psychiatry couldn't keep its journals afloat, couldn't keep its conferences afloat, couldn't keep its organizations afloat without money from drug companies. The drug companies really have psychiatry in their pocket.
This is a profession whose diagnoses have been heavily influenced by people who are heavily influenced by the pharmaceutical industry, and whose treatments are almost exclusively these days pharmaceuticals. We should be able to count on them. I do not believe that we can.
精神科医たちによる絶え間ない宣伝により、抗精神薬の処方は精神医療だけでなく医療従事者全体にまで浸透しています。しかしこの宣伝キャンペーンには他ならぬ精神科医たちの私腹を肥やすための2つ目の狙いがあります。そしてその直接のターゲットはあなたなのです。
Abilify helps control symptoms of bipolar mania.
Ask your doctor about Effexor XR.
Paxil, the most prescribed medication of its kind.
Prozac Weekly is here. Zoloft, a prescription.
Seraphim. PMDD.
And
精神科医と製薬会社は精神医薬を仲間の処方者たちだけに誇大広告するわけではありません。彼らはエンドユーザー、つまりあなたにもダイレクトに売り込みます。あなたが彼らのオフィスに来て処方を求めることを計算に入れているのです。
The direct-to-consumer advertising is instilling the notion in every human being that something is mentally wrong, something needs correction. That drives people to see a psychiatrist to help to mitigate this by dispensing the medication, by dispensing a drug that they have had pushed on them on countless television ads, countless magazine ads, and countless print ads that say, hey, there's something wrong with you, go get help for it.
こうした大量の消費者への直接の広告が最も露骨に行われているのはテレビです。以前は違いました。最近まで精神医薬をテレビで広告することは厳しく制限されていたのです。しかし FDA は1997年にメディア広告に関する規則を緩和するよう説得されました。これは国連で署名された国際条約の第10条に直接違反しています。
Every 5 minutes there's a new drug ad. And this is not by accident. This is cold, canny, scientific design.
Ads are fundamentally of two types. One type of ad is a effort to try to get the patient to take the drug company's drug.
Abilify helps control symptoms of bipolar mania and reduce.
But then the second kind of direct-to-consumer advertising is the you're sick and you didn't know it advertising.
You could be suffering from generalized anxiety disorder.
Because they want to create sales, so what they're going to do is tell people, do you have these symptoms? Do you have this disease? Do you have this particular condition?
But they hit it so hard on television that people say, ask your doctor, ask your doctor. Every commercial is a referral to the doctor. See, they're working for each other.
Ask your doctor about Cymbalta. Depression hurts. Cymbalta can help.
I can go to my doctor and say, here are my symptoms, and walk out with the prescription I want. I can ask for a drug by name, and most of the time I'll be given drugs. So basically I'm my own doctor.
The industry defends what it's doing by saying this is some kind of public health education campaign. And I'm sorry, I think if you go to an advertising agency, you're advertising.
テレビでの精神医薬の広告は当初から驚異的な成功を収めました。最初の3年だけで精神医薬の売り上げは2.5 倍に急上昇しました。その総額は今や記録的なレベルに達しており、製薬業界はテレビ広告だけで年間29億ドルを費やしています。こうして人々を精神科医のオフィスに送り込めば、もう一つの販売の策略、つまり無料サンプルを使って彼らを薬物の虜にすればいいのです。
The industry is willing to give out millions of dollars worth of free samples because it generates billions of dollars in sales.
You want a prescription and you want Prozac written forever as a maintenance therapy. So you establish that with some free Prozac up front.
Here, take this sample, it doesn't cost you anything, and then if you like it or if it seems to work, then we'll make a prescription, but you're going to have to pay for that prescription. The sample is free. So it's really a marketing technique.
They got a cash cow. Zero refill means you've got to go back to the doctor for another consultation, for another subscription, and it just goes forever. This is business. This is money.
消費者へのダイレクトな販売戦略が公共の情報としてカモフラージュされていることもあります。精神科医たちは定期的にメディアに登場し、最新の精神疾患の流行について一般市民に警告し、最新の大発見を声高に売り込んでいます。彼らは新聞記事や雑誌記事を書き、その精神保健意識向上キャンペーンをさらに広めています。精神薬に関する公正な情報を提供するよう要求する患者擁護団体でさえ、よく調べてみれば製薬会社に資金援助され、精神科医たちが管理するダミー組織なのです。
They were started specifically by the industry themselves, and the public isn't informed of that. You know, it's basically a great big lie to the public that they think they're going to a charitable organization that has their best interest at heart.
典型的な例は注意欠陥障害の子どもと大人たち、略称チャッドという団体です。中枢神経刺激剤の製造メーカーのための最大で最も豊富に資金提供されているダミー組織です。スティーブン・プログはこの団体の元役員です。
When I became the CHAD coordinator for Las Vegas, they gave me a manual, and in it it said, we want to provide unbiased information to help and support people who have ADD. For the next 30 days, we put 22 parents and their kids on a program with lab tests to find out what their causes were, eliminated their causes, they got prescription-free, medication-free, side-effect-free, and they got better with their self-esteem, and they became actually happier, healthier, and more successful. Chad found out about this, called me up and says, we do not allow people to talk about nutrition in any of our seminars. We only prescribe going to a psychiatrist who will only prescribe drugs and therapy. So they said you can no longer work with us, and they fired me for simply recommending that parents go get a lab test, find out what the causes are, and eliminate the causes. They do not allow that. They only allow medication and psychiatric treatment.
精神医療の患者擁護団体も医療アンケートを装った一般向けの市場調査を広範囲に出すことで向精神薬による治療を宣伝しています。
You can take a survey of maybe 16 questions. And if you are a normal human being who's lived through ranges of emotions of normal life experience, if you've known the exhilaration of the birth of a child, a niece, a nephew, and the devastation of a divorce and the loss of dreams, and answer honestly to those questions, you will diagnose yourself as bipolar. And the instructions that come back along with the diagnosis or the warning that you're probably bipolar say, print this out and take it to your doctor.
誰かがインターネットにアクセスし、よくある人生上の質問に答え、精神障害と診断されるのはどれほど簡単なのでしょう。ここに任意に選ばれたボランティアがいます。普通の生活を営んでいるあらゆる世代の人々です。
Do you feel sad, blue, unhappy, or down in the dumps?
Sometimes. I've had periods of great optimism and other periods of equally great pessimism. Yeah, that happens a little bit.
I get tired for no reason. Sometimes.
My life is pretty full. Nah, not really.
For no apparent reason, I sometimes have been very angry or hostile. It's hard for me to concentrate on reading.
I am restless and can't keep still.
My heart beats faster than usual.
I have trouble sleeping, shortness of breath, gained weight, trembling hands. I have an idea that most of these are going to be sometimes.
Everyone has.
As in everybody? Somewhat.
Somewhat true.
Just a little.
Oh, yeah, I am.
Alright, my score totaled 42. Bipolar disorder, moderate to severe symptoms. Wow.
The answer reflects on the presence of depressive symptoms.
Currently suffering from an anxiety disorder. I may be suffering from bipolar 1. Minimal to mild depression.
An obsessive compulsive disorder.
Guess that means I'm a psycho.
Guess I'll go to a psych. Try to see if I could work it out, get some meds or something.
合計すると、こういった普通の人々の半数が精神医学の病名をつけられ、治療を受けるよう指導されました。この計算でいくと、アメリカ合衆国の人口の半数、約1億5000万人が精神疾患に分類されることになります。
Now you have a direct line of consumers just walking in with a little pre-survey that says that they potentially can have bipolar, ADHD, stress, anxiety, any of those categories, and they just need to take this assessment tool and say, okay, that basically that is what you have and here's your drug.
精神科医たちは現在、こうした評価手法を義務化することを要求しています。10代の精神医学選別検査は、自殺防止プログラムを装い、子どもたちを診断し、投薬するために学校内で精神保健の検査が実施されています。例えば、チェルシー・ローズは平均的なティーンネイジャーでしたが、ある朝学校に出かけ、帰宅した時には精神障害の診断を受けていました。
The Rhodes family in Indiana, their young girl went to school one day, and all of a sudden they told her they were taking her into her room, and they move her into her room and give her the 10-minute teen screen test. And shortly after taking the test, she's pulled aside in the hallway and she's told she has two problems, basically two mental problems. One, obsessive compulsive disorder, and social anxiety disorder.
Her parents were stunned, dumbfounded. They didn't know the teen screen was going to screen their child. They had not been asked permission.
People at school had told her that she was mentally ill with these two conditions based off of a computer test that took her 10 minutes to answer. One of the questions was worded if Chelsea went out a lot. She answered no. We'd ask her why she answered that way. She said, because Mom, you and Dad don't allow us to go out on school nights. I have to be home to do my homework and take care of our household chores. The other question was, do you ever feel nervous or anxious when you're in front of a group of your friends or peers? Chelsea answered yes. She explained to us that because when she has to stand up in front of a group of people and give a book report in one of her classes, she's very nervous. You know, I'm 43 years old and I'm nervous in front of every one of you today, but that doesn't make me mentally ill.
I absolutely believe that the survey for Teen Screen was intentionally structured to flag as many children as possible as having a possible mental health problem.
10代の選別検査を作り、その調査票を書いたのは誰でしょう。デビッド・シェファー博士、製薬業界と強い結びつきを持つ精神科医です。シェファーの質問票は全く科学とは言えないものです。彼自身が実施した研究において、全生徒の 84% が間違って自殺傾向があると警告されたことを認めました。しかし、その結果がどれほどの心の傷となり得るかは認めませんでした。エライア・グリーソンはテキサス州の中学校で選別検査を受けた時はまだ11歳でした。
It was 7th grade, and they had all the girls go into the cafeteria because they said that a lot of girls have depression, so they was working on some depression screen.
Next thing I know, there's those middle schools tell my husband now that CPS is there at the school taking a layer because she's suicidal.
I'm like, suicide? I'm not trying to kill myself. I love myself. I've always loved myself.
So I don't know if she was eating at the school or they'd already taken her away.
When they took her layer, my girls and I, we didn't sleep for about a good 3 days. For the first 3 days, because my house was empty without her.
And they was making me sign papers talking about if you don't take these medicines, you can't see your parents. So they was telling me, you know, if you take your medicine, you can see your parents.
My daughter was on 22 different types of medication that this one psychiatrist gave her.
They drugged me up so bad that they said they had to drag me. And I used to wonder how I got to my room.
When I saw for myself what they were giving her and how much and how often, I just thought, they're gonna kill this child. And the parents were helpless.
Then after a while, that's when I was just like, I'm not about to take no more medicine until I call my parents. And then that's when they was like, okay, well, we're gonna give it to you anyways. They restrained me and shot me up. I was in 4 points. They laid me out on my stomach with my feet like this and tied me up.
One day, they must have put her in about 12 restraints in one day.
They said I was restrained about 70 or 80 times. After a couple of months, they was like, you know, your parents don't want to see you. They don't want to talk to you or anything. So I was really hurt.
We tried everything. Nobody know. We didn't know what hospital. We didn't even know where they taking her.
After 2 weeks, you're supposed to hear, or you're supposed to be able to see your child. They didn't give me that. I didn't see Alea till 6 months later.
But I was a good child. I didn't deserve for that. And he messed up a lot of things. To this day, I still wish that I could just go back and be like, man, you know what, I'm not even gonna take the test.
I would always tell every parent I see, they was ask me, don't do the team screening, because it will mess up your family.
このような精神障害の選別検査プログラムが急速に増加しています。10代の選別検査だけでも現在アメリカの43の州500以上の学校で何万もの児童たちに実施されています。
Has nothing to do with helping kids, has nothing to do with mental health, has nothing to do with medicine. It has everything to do with the pushing of drugs.
So it presents itself as being a wonderful, altruistic program, whereas in fact, I believe its cold-blooded and cold-hearted intent is to recruit more children into the very subjective diagnoses of mental illness and to treat those kids with medication.
しかし精神薬の押し付けは教室内にとどまりません。すべての市民を精神疾患に関して選別検査する法案が導入されてきました。高齢の患者、退役軍人、妊娠中の女性も含まれ、あなたが支払う税金で賄われます。
Psychiatrists benefit from both ends, from the pharmaceutical end for being paid to write the prescription, and then from the patient for being there to receive the prescription.
It's an industry that cannot allow the human condition to go unmedicated, and I think this is where the problem begins.
If everybody considers themselves to be sick in some way or more than one way, and that the only control, the only hope for their happiness is to be on pills for the rest of their lives, that's the goal.
The pharmaceuticals and the psychiatric community are in a cleanup, and that's what it's all about. It has nothing to do with helping our kids or, you know, their mental health. It's all about money.
今日、製薬会社は処方薬の販売戦略に毎年53億ドル以上を費やしています。10年前のほぼ9倍です。その結果、世界中での抗精神薬の売り上げは800億ドルにまで達しました。その間も精神科医たちは自分たちが作り出している悲惨な状況を意図的に無視しているのです。
I'm 10 years old, and I'm going to read, I think, the side effects of a drug called Daytriana.
The drug Adderall.
Luvox.
Cymbalta.
Gyodon.
Lexapro.
Namenda. I have a question. Where do I find the side effects? How do I read it if it's so small?
Just a bunch of letters squished together.
I can't read this. This is the side effects of the drug.
Side effects. Stroke.
What the heck?
Speech disorder.
Eye disorders, vision blurred.
Dry mouth. Nervous.
Tremor. Dizziness.
Delirium and coma. Tardive dyskinesia.
They experience worsening of their depression.
Aggressive reaction. Paranoid reaction. Psychosis.
Serious cardiovascular events.
Other serious heart problems.
Heart failure.
What?
Suicide. Suicidal thoughts, suicidal thinking and behavior.
Increases the risk of suicide.
An increased risk of death, sudden death.
These guys must be kidding.
Wow. This is gross.
Seeing this on a warning label, does anybody have any clue what they're putting their kids into?
This isn't good.
No drug has side effects. They're all effects. Side effect is just a way that doctors explain away the effects that they don't like or you won't like, but they're effects.
These are the effects of these drugs. They're not just what might happen to you, they're what happen more often than not.
We name them side effects because they're an unintended consequence.
The antidepressant drugs not only don't make you happy, they have all kinds of negative effects on the system as a whole.
These drugs are absorbed and distributed throughout your entire body, so they have side effects through all of your tissues and organs, including your liver and your kidneys and your nervous system.
They destroy the brain, the neural net. They literally kill brain cells and cause all kinds of brain disorders. That's why we have they're not side effects, they're direct effects.
しかし精神科医たちは人々への無数の深刻な健康上のリスクを軽視し続けながらカメラの前でそれを臆面もなく認めたのです。
I think I tell them the main side effects. I don't tell them every side effect because there are so many possible side effects.
I would say the majority of patients experience some side effects.
People get side effects to every medication you try.
They all have side effects.
All kinds of side effects. Lots of side effects. Physical feelings of sickness.
Headaches, insomnia, so then they have a little trouble going to sleep.
Drowsiness. Sedation is very frequent.
Restlessness, appetite stimulation,
neurologic side effects,
tremor or muscle spasms,
stiffness, weight gain, obesity,
weight gain and stuff like that,
decreased performance of sexual functioning, sexual side effects can happen,
sexual dysfunction, etc.
I've never had anybody die or anything, but I've had people faint and stuff, and it's really sort of unpredictable.
You name it, and it can be a side effect.
なぜ精神科医たちはどんな副作用が起こるかを予測できないのでしょう。誰一人としてそうした薬物がどう作用するかを知らないからです。
At least with street drugs, people know that they're dangerous, that they should be off of them. With pharmaceuticals, people are told they're safe to take every day.
しかし向精神薬は安全とは程遠く、死を招きうる科学的な毒物であることがますます明らかになってきています。
Some of the side effects that have become of concern lately are suicide, increased risk of suicide, increased risk of homicide.
These aren't people that were horribly depressed when they were given a drug. These are people who are given a drug for social anxiety or difficulty sleeping or mild depression and then become suicidal. And so when they become suicidal and they kill themselves, what the doctor does is go back and say, oh, well, it's because they were depressed.
The label itself, the disorder, is what is blamed for the side effects. When in reality, it's the drug that is causing the side effect. It is the drug that is the problem.
例えば抗うつ剤を処方されたウッディ・ウィチャックがその薬を取ったのは心の悩みのためではなく、ただよく眠れるようになるためでした。
My husband and I, Tim, his nickname Woody, we were married just 2 months shy of 10 years, so we've had a long life together. And Woody was a guy who was healthy. He was a big runner. He's never had a history of depression or any other so-called mental illness. He was given Zoloft for insomnia. I find Woody one night completely sweat through his shirt in fetal position, kept going, Kim, you gotta help me. I don't know what's happening to me. It's like my head's outside my body looking in. Kim, help me, help me. We did breathing, listened to music, prayed, anything to calm him down from this head outside his body feeling. And a week later, he was found dead hanging. A guy who loved life.
精神科医たちは精神薬は人命を救うと主張しますが、彼ら自身の研究によれば抗精神薬によって自殺の危険性は倍増します。ある薬品ではその危険性はほぼ7倍にまで増えます。
As a pharmacist who has been studying the problem for the past 7 years, I do see a glaring connection between the high use of these psychoactive substances and the rise of violence.
If people knew that the mechanism was not known of these drugs, that they could
cause, if there's a real chance for them to get a homicidal tendency or even suicide, if you take the drug, there's a chance you may want to kill yourself.
And I could repeat probably a dozen other examples of significant self-inflicted harm or significant violence to others in patients who had never had that experience in their adult life.
ワイオミング州の高齢者ドナルド・シェルはそうした患者の例です。
Donald Shell was a man in his 60s, a gentleman, a family man, a funny man. He had periodic episodes of depression, but never any real serious mental health issues, and became depressed, had a down period, went to a general practitioner, and was given Paxil. 2 days later, he shot his wife, his daughter, his 9-month-old granddaughter, and then himself. The first question the jury was asked, very telling question, can Paxil cause some people to commit homicide and or suicide? To which they answered yes.
ドナルド・シェルはパキシルを取ってから数日後にその薬物のせいで殺人を犯しました。しかし向精神薬の長期使用は一生残るダメージを生み出すことも分かっています。精神科医たちはこの都合の悪い事実を無視しています。
In the long run, the side effects may actually be worse than the original condition.
I don't think the average patient has any idea that the long-term use of this drug is now associated with very serious diseases, with diabetes, with kidney failure, with tardive dyskinesia, a movement disorder that's very serious and permanent and irreversible.
You can be affected by these drugs in any part of your body, your brain, your heart, your kidneys.
That's why people die early very often, because they are prescribed things and the long-term effects are, in some cases, the death of the individual.
ダメージをさらに増幅するのが多剤投与です。つまり精神科医たちはそれぞれの作用を補い合う複数の精神薬を処方することで私腹を肥やしているのです。
If you have drugs that create side effects, that gives you a ready market for more drugs to cure the side effects. It seems to me that it's a self-propagating system.
And what ends up happening is that each one of those new drugs that's added into the scenario brings on another symptom for which there's another drug, for which there's another symptom, for which there's another drug.
And it just snowballs into a vicious circle of one drug causing the need for another drug.
Sometimes people come and they're on such a cocktail of so many different drugs for so many different things.
It's rare now that I see a senior citizen that is on less than 5 or 6 drugs at one time. Some 12, 15.
One will lead to the next, and they're all toxic. This is how the game is played.
精神科医たちが抗精神薬の過剰投与というマネーゲームをますます社会に広げていくにつれて、現在最も悲惨な犠牲者となっているのが子供たちです。
Rebecca Riley, 2.5 years old, they diagnosed her with bipolar disorder and ADHD. They had her on an antipsychotic, they had her on a heart drug, they say, for ADHD, and they had her on an anti-seizure. And then one other one for side effects. 4 drugs at 2.5 years old. She can't even zip up her own pants. She's like a little rag doll. The school nurse, 2 teachers, the principal, the social worker, all said they never seen any behavior in this little 4-year-old girl that would warrant these kind of medications. And all specifically called this doctor and said, please take her off these. She died at a little over 4 years old. This little girl that didn't have a chance, and the psychiatrist just let her.
レベッカ・ライ医の精神科医木藤佳代子は裁判を受けて刑務所に行くどころか免許を失うことさえありませんでした。精神科医はどのようにして罪を免れているのでしょうか。その答えは注意義務基準として知られる法的概念の中にあります。
The standard of care is based on what do other doctors do? What would a reasonable physician do in this situation? And the reality is that what most physicians do is prescribe medications.
As long as they've done their paperwork properly and documented that this child had the symptoms that led them to this conclusion, they appear to be completely protected from any kind of a lawsuit as a result.
The standard of care is what allows doctors to seriously injure or even kill a patient
with total impunity.
So the standard of care now has been implemented to where you can get away with, if you're a medical doctor, psychiatrist, you can get away with murder.
死亡者数は増加し続けています。現在、向精神薬によって年間およそ4万2000人が亡くなっています。
The cost to society is very real and very devastating. But the medicine they're practicing isn't real. It's a hoax.
Profit always comes before patient safety, and they take a very short-sighted view. It's all about how can we make money today, not what price are we going to pay tomorrow.
The trail of destruction that a psychiatrist leaves in his path is of no concern to that guy. It's all about money.
その金額は莫大です。現在、精神医療は3000億ドルを超える産業となっています。何の治療法もないにもかかわらず、精神科医たちによってさらなる画期的な進歩が約束されるごとに、病気、怪我、死亡による犠牲者はますます増えていく一方です。あなたのような無防備な一般市民は自分で身を守らなければならないのです。
My wife and I are blessed. We have 7 children, and we love them all. They're all our favorites. Each child we have is our favorites. And Beth was extremely special.
She was kind, generous.
She had like a really sweet and caring personality.
She had this beautiful smile, like an inviting.
She could make friends with basically any stranger on the street and get a smile or a laugh out of them.
Beth was having a hard time sleeping for maybe 4, 5, or 6 weeks. And so we said, Beth, you should go to the doctor and get something to help you sleep.
He said, okay, well, I'll try to give you something to lessen your anxiety, and it should help you sleep.
Within 5 minutes, a 5-minute visit, he prescribed her Paxil.
When I first saw Beth right after she went on the Paxil, she was different. Like, I felt like she was drugged.
And by the 2nd or 3rd day, she's like, I don't know, I just don't feel right. You know, I feel strange in my skin.
But after about 3 or 4 days, I remember that Beth was, at times, very different, like sullen, keeping to herself.
My mom and her were having dinner, and she said she didn't have any real emotion. Like, she kind of felt emotionally numb.
She was like a different person. Like, she just seemed like she was under the influence of something. She didn't seem like herself. She seemed like she was tripping out.
I talked to her on the phone, and she told me she didn't want to be there. And I was like, why don't you want to be there? She's like, I just don't feel like myself. I just feel like crazy. I just don't feel right.
I truly believe that she was hallucinating maybe and going in and out of this psychotic state at this point.
It seemed like she was melting down, like emotionally. She was becoming worse every day.
I said, are you suicidal? I actually asked her. And she laughed at me. And she said, no, I would never do that.
And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm just going to lay down next to her and I'll rub her head and I'll talk to her and we'll try to figure out what we're going to do because something's not right here. And my son Matthew was right behind me going upstairs. And when I got to the top of the stairs, I saw her hanging in the hallway.
Then the police were all over the place and people were coming and going. And about 3 hours, 4 hours after my daughter died, one of my friends came over and said, you know, I was speaking to so-and-so, one of our other friends, and she said, oh, Beth must have been on Paxil. That's the only way she would kill herself.
It just wasn't her. There was nothing in her that would have done that. She was the most non-violent, like gentle. It's a violent way to die.
It had to be the drug. There was no other answer.
If we knew what we knew now, Beth would be here with us today. I know that for a fact.
ベス・ウィンターの悲劇は向精神薬が処方されるたびに繰り返される数多くの物語の一つに過ぎません。しかし精神科医たちは彼らの薬物が安全で効果的であると信じるよう主張します。彼らは精神保健の専門家であり、あなたはそうではないからです。しかし彼らを信頼すれば悲惨な結果になることを証明する事例が相次いでいます。
Psychiatry is pseudoscience. It's false science. It cannot withstand rigorous review if people would just look at the evidence.
If they help anyone, it's not worth the risk to the people that are harmed by them.
They are betraying every customer they have.
They don't know what they're doing, and we need to educate
the public to use their feet and walk away.
人々をもっと啓発するにはどうすればよいのでしょう。患者にはほとんど知られていませんが、精神科医にはよく知られている重要な医療上の権利を行使すればいいのです。
We want to be able to present the patient with alternatives. And one of the central ideas in ethics is informed consent.
The components of informed consent are letting the person know, first of all, what the diagnosis is and what it's based on so that they can say, this is why we need to treat you. And secondly, what the treatment is.
Every patient in the healthcare system has a right to informed consent. That is, they have a right to be told the risks and benefits of the treatment, the risks and benefits of alternative treatments, and the risks and benefits of no treatment at all.
Patients should be totally informed, fully informed about every medication that the psychiatrist offers to them to take or says they should take.
調査によると、精神医薬についての十分かつ正確な情報は人々にほとんど伝わっていないことが確認されています。精神医薬についての十分かつ正確なインフォームドコンセントを構成するものは何でしょう。これらの医師や医療従事者はこの主題に関して豊富な経験を持っています。第一に、精神医学でいう障害は医学的な治療を要する実際の病気ではありません。
It's true that there's no biological findings that really support any of these psychiatric diagnoses being medical illnesses. And the burden of proof really is the other way around. It's not that you have to prove that there is no biological science. The burden is on psychiatry to prove that there is.
There's no blood test. There's no lab test. There's no X-ray. These are just clusters of behavior that a group of psychiatrists have voted that it's a disease.
Can you imagine doctors having to have powwows to decide if a heart attack is a real disease or not? No, they don't have to decide that. They don't have to have a vote on that.
They should be asking the doc, geez doc, where's the chemical test for that? Where is the objective test for this? And I guarantee you that they'll be told, we don't have a chemical test for that.
There is no such thing as a chemical imbalance. And any psychiatrist that you talk to, if you ask him this question, they'll all admit it in private, but they won't admit it in public. It's a scandal.
So this is all subjective. Nothing objective about psychiatry.
第2に、抗精神薬が何らかの精神的な問題を解決するという科学的証拠は存在しません。
Since there is no measurement for these psychiatric diagnoses, because they're really just subjective, for the same reason there really can't be a measurement for the effects of the drug.
In terms of medication, the evidence that's claimed is the medications are highly effective and not very toxic. But actually, in fact, the data in psychiatry are very clear that that's not true. What is true is that the medications are barely, if at all, more effective than placebo.
You're selling drugs to people under false premises, under a disease that's been invented. So how do you measure efficacy among a disease that doesn't even exist?
第3に、抗精神薬は症状を覆い隠し、短期的あるいは長期的に深刻な副作用を伴います。
Whatever problem you're being treated for, whether it's depression, real or otherwise, or cardiovascular disease, medicating away the symptoms is not solving the problem.
The patent medication gives the appearance of having helped because in the short term, it usually doesn't show the bad effects that are going to happen in the long term. So it's very deceptive.
The longer the patient's on the medication, the worse the prognosis is.
None of these medications hit precise targets. You begin accumulating all kinds of collateral damage. In other words, other organs in the body are actually harmed.
So for the first time, we're seeing kids in grade school or middle school who have type 2 diabetes and who have the beginning stages of cardiovascular disease.
So you see Parkinson's disease, you see tardive dyskinesias, you see other movement disorders.
Is it true that we're now seeing a lot of death from psychiatric drugs? Absolutely yes.
第4に、抗精神薬は薬物への依存と中毒を引き起こす可能性があります。
One of the hallmarks of informed consent with psychiatric meds is you have to discuss the potential for addiction.
The vast majority of psychiatric drugs create psychological and physical dependency.
Most patients that I've seen that were on these drugs have difficulty getting off of them. It's rare for somebody to just be able to stop it without a problem.
第5に、ほとんどの精神的な問題は身体的な病気が元で引き起こされています。
Many physical conditions can cause mental problems or what pose as psychiatric symptoms, but the psychiatrist, in the records I've reviewed, psychiatrist does not do an in-depth study of what could be causing the problem.
And if the doctor isn't taking the time to find the cause of those symptoms, then unfortunately those symptoms may continue and there may be a serious underlying medical disorder that's being overlooked.
The question is it better to treat depression with a drug, or is it better to treat depression by trying to figure out what caused the depression and working it out with the patient?
Dehydration can make you exhibit symptoms of depression. Sleeplessness can make you exhibit symptoms of depression. Eating a terrible diet, hypoglycemia, being sedentary, all of these things are biological reasons for having symptoms of depression.
I have in my practice children who are misdiagnosed as having ADD, ADHD, who really have Lyme disease.
70% of all what are classified as mental illnesses actually have a physical cause, a physical problem causing that.
第6に、感情的心理的な苦悩がどれほど深刻であっても抗精神薬を含まない数多くの効果的な選択肢があります。
Once you've proven that there is no problem in the body and that there is no malfunction in the brain, then you have to begin to address these other levels of the self. And I think that's what psychiatry has completely stopped doing.
There are very few conditions that cannot be treated by other methods than the use of drugs.
Any forces that impinge on medicine that make us think that the drug approach is the only approach is undermining good patient care.
薬物を使用しない選択肢が患者に伝えられることはめったにないため、本当のインフォームドコンセントがなされることはほとんどありません。
When you get into informed consent, it's almost a responsibility of the patient to make an inquiry about the hazards of the drug and not rely on what the psychiatrist or physician tells them.
We can't go in and abdicate our responsibility as consumers simply because somebody has an MD after their name or someone is a psychiatrist and we think they know more than we do.
The best way to protect yourself is to educate yourself, is to ask questions not only of your doctor, but to do your own research.
Don't be ignorant, be informed. Get information from as many places as you can. That's how you'll be an intelligent, skeptical consumer, and that's how you will protect the safety of yourself, your children, and your entire family from this industry of death known as modern psychiatry.
過去50年にわたり、現代精神医学は私たちの世界に浸透してきました。抗精神薬の過剰投与も同様です。しかし、こうした不正な医療行為を暴露する方法があります。すべての苦情と精神薬の有害な副作用をあなたの国の医薬品規制当局に報告することです。アメリカ合衆国にはメッドウォッチという連邦の報告プログラムがあります。
MedWatch is a voluntary reporting system, a passive reporting system where doctors, patients, healthcare providers, pharmacists, anybody really can make a report saying that they think that what they experienced or what their patient experienced was an adverse drug effect.
And this is what we call post-marketing surveillance. And this begins to get a look at what the side effects of long-term or chronic use of these drugs really is.
The FDA admits that probably only 1% of all the adverse drug effects are actually reported by patients or physicians.
医薬品のすべての副作用を報告することによってのみ、精神薬の過剰投与による恐怖の真の規模が明るみになるでしょう。あなたは事実を知っています。このビデオを知り合いの医師にも紹介してください。あなた自身やあなたの友人、愛する家族が精神薬の過剰投与という巨大ビジネスの犠牲者になることを許してはいけません。精神医学と抗精神薬の過剰投与についてのより詳しい情報を知りたい方、精神医療における不正行為の事例を報告したい方は市民の人権擁護の会までご連絡ください。